5.2.3 Economic Development Report. Any questions? Better move that we receive it. Councillor Peoples, seconded Councillor Plum. Those in favour? Carried. Okay, 5.3.1 Planning and Development Report. Councillor Peoples moves. Seconded Councillor Hanson. As to leave the room. Comments, questions? The development, I just don't note an update from the DA for Lake Dolly. Any advice on that?
We had a meeting last week and it remains the same.
We're waiting on the cultural heritage assessment to be completed.
Is there a time frame on that?
We need to chase that one up because they're supposed to get back to us with their availability. And if they recommend cultural heritage specialist isn't available, we have to look into alternative ways to resolve that issue.
Is that the only outstanding assessment that is required for a decision notice to be issued?
Yes, I believe so, because everything else is pretty much just negotiated.
Are we anticipating, whilst I note you just said you can't give a definitive time frame, are we anticipating a lengthy delay from now until it's finished, or are we thinking it could be finalised in time for a July?
Their discussion around the cultural heritage assessment, I believe it's relatively straightforward and shouldn't take too long to actually do the work. It's just their availability that we're waiting on.
The other DA here will possibly lapse as a result of the decision made later in the meeting around the levy. Apologies for, sorry, I shouldn't have discussed that. Councill's in the room, one of them.
Really, Mr. Mayor, it's the, what does this mean when if it's closed, that means it's finalised, is that?
Yeah, that was it. Brett?
Proposed development for the renewable energy project, it's just got the status is closed. That
Closed from the planner's point of view.
That everything's
finished.
ready, yeah.
Yes, so that'll drop off in the next report.
Yeah.
So we just indicating that they'll finish that job.
Yeah.
What are the state's concerns regarding natural hazards and cultural heritage? Is it the natural hazard the flooding at Alpha for the draft planning scheme? Last page, item 3.
Yes, that was the bushfire, and there was a bushfire element, but that was on it was really the flooding Alpha. And
So the bushfire was a regional issue. Sorry to interrupt. The bushfire was they were concerned about development on a regional basis. And flooding was limited to the locality of Alpha.
yes.
Sorry.
And they were expecting a response from the state next week. Within a week
That quickly.
about where the state will come back with more questions, requirements, but they're expecting it within the week.
And cultural heritage. What's the concerns there? Well, it says that the primary concerns that have been identified relate to natural hazards and cultural heritage.
I'm not sure of that.
ask the planners in their next report to us to identify whether they mean there's an issue from what we've identified as acceptable development, perhaps from a cultural heritage point of view, or if it's mapping around identified cultural heritage sites or identification of or something like that.
So I do believe, because we've had the request from the state, that they want to know what our cultural heritage process is. So I'm assuming it's related to that, how we identify that in planning scheme.
Can you define for us by cultural heritage, are we talking native title cultural heritage or just so all elements of cultural heritage?
It would be, but yeah, so how do we, if there's a development, how do we assess it for cultural heritage in terms of its impact on cultural heritage?
Do we have an identified process for that?
Well, that's what the state's asking for.
Or do we?
We do it on a case-by-case basis, so
Like
GPA has got an officer, cultural heritage officer, which we've used. So for the rec park, so we engaged him, and he went out and identified both Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultural elements on that site. Did a report, it's gone in the report. So we've just been doing it on a case-by-case basis because we don't have a documented process. And I would say that is what they do after.
And is that process, a case-by-case process, is that similar to what we're now undertaking for the live DA for Lake Dolly?
Yes.
Okay. All right, councillors? I'm done. The floor is yours. Councillor Gleeson.
I'm not big.
Nancy? Any more, Councillor?
Yeah.
Okay. Did we move to receive? We did.
Yes, again.
Community care, I'll just,
We're going to vote on that one.
Yeah.
Yes, Amanda?
all in favour? 5-0. Can I have somebody move, please, that we receive the Community Care Services report? Councillor Gleeson, seconded Councillor Peoples. Those in favour? 7-0. Questions? Five, three, three. Well, sorry, I'll hold. Two officers. Council has only just returned. I'll wait for them. Have you got any questions? You don't have any community care? Right. Councillor Plum, you have nothing for community care? Peoples? No. Right. Okay. 5, 3, 3. Can I have somebody move that we receive the report? Councillor Hanson, seconded Councillor Plum. All those in favour? 6-0. Got questions?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the housing sales, the reason why we're under what we expected is that because we've still got more to sell, or that's just we may that much less on the houses than we thought that we would make.
I think I know the answer, but I'm not going to guess.
So the, well really we don't really know what we're going to sell throughout the year because we don't know what the buyer is going to approach us. So we just allocate an amount in the budget for sales, an approximate amount.
And you just,
We sell, that includes the sale of houses and should be land as well.
Does it include land sold to recover rates and arrears?
Only if we, no.
Because we only retain the amount that is equal to rates.
So that won't be included.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Brett, but the sale of house and land figure has always been equal to the purchase of housing to keep the budget neutral in that respect, because we've got a request with the state to purchase some housing, and we've said that if we sell, well then buy, then we'll sell, and that therefore it's in the budget to do it if we choose to, but it has a neutral impact because we don't know how long it's going to take the state to approve it.
Yeah.
So that 90,000 is actually the sales, for example, like the house in Jericho and the house in Alpha that were sold, that aren't actually, they were ours all the time, they aren't part of anything from the state decision around the community housing that we currently occupy on their behalf. So whatever figure we put there will always be equal to the other one. So it's not really, it's actually, we're $90,000 above budget realistically.
yeah.
We haven't spent the 200, there's no contra entry, so.
We're actually, sorry, Sarah, I probably misled you on this one, that also include the sale of land, so it should be house and land sales.
Yeah.
So when you take in land sales, so we sold 215,000 worth of land as well. So it is it's well over budget for the better.
Okay, further questions? Councillor Gleeson.
Mr. Mayor, there's a few items here, we have discussed it before, but I'll just pick out one. For the workshop extensions for Aramac, there was $50,000, estimated cost $55,000, there was money set aside, it hasn't been done, and we're nearly to the end of the financial year. Is that job, has been done, or hasn't been paid for yet? Or?
Hasn't been paid for. We're just getting the building approval. It's a similar situation to Alpha is because it's gone over 500 square metres in the floor area. You have to get fire approval. And so in Aramac it will be fine because there's enough water pressure to meet the fire requirements, but we've just got to get the sign off. But yeah, it will be done.
So there's a few of those other items. Well, I saw a bulldozer the other day over at Aramac Wasteland's landfill. There's still no money being spent there, so that invoice hasn't been anyway up yet.
So that's probably, that would have gone to maintenance or operational costs. But we had allowed money in the budget to do some improvements at the landfill. We actually reallocated that got reallocated. So the bulldozer is just pushing up the landfill, and he's left to park there. So
I believe we amended the budget and reallocated that money when we were trying to find the money that we were short for the Alpha Aramac showgrounds. amenities block. That was one of the projects that we rocked. It was two. Can't think what the second one was, but that was definitely one of them.
Mr. Mayor, just as long as, probably anyway, just as long as I don't come back in another 12 months' time and the PA system in Mark Walden needs upgrading and we say, oh no, it's already there last year, where's that money gone and the job hasn't been done? That, I just wanted a bit more clarity on that because we're getting to the end of the year and the money hasn't been spent, the job hasn't been done.
So what is the procedure for those?
That are carried over.
Given that they're not in the budget we just adopted, but they're still in this one.
Yes, and there will be some carryovers. They're not completed. I'm not sure about the showground sound. They were supposed to be here in May.
Through this meeting, yes, they were supposed to be here in May. I emailed them just before I went away, and they had rescheduled, but they haven't come back to me with the rescheduled date, so I'll email them tomorrow to follow up on that. But we should be able to get that done, and cost will come back to this financial year.
Thank you.
But that Aramac landfill, that money was reallocated. We will have costs against that.
Mr. Mayor, Brett, obviously we haven't paid for everything with regards to the bullock shed. We've got a bit of money left there. So
I'll let Jenny answer that one.
have you sending it somewhere else?
No, Mr. Mayor, that might have been some budget savings.
Oh, no.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do need to spend some more there though, so we will probably just have a look at some basic electricity stuff there because that is funded to $80,000. So we have got, there is a little bit more expenditure than that what's in there because there is carried forward. So there's probably
So council fund, yes, there is some money left over in that project and that's fully funded, so we put power onto the building and obviously that comes at a cost.
Yep.
Okay.
And we're not sure as well whether when they actually put the dray in on the wagon, I think it would cost at that point as well.
That's okay.
Maybe they should have put the right there and built the shed in the filters area.
Further questions? Okay. 534 is half the room empties out. Right.
Is it just policy procedures? It goes under the spend money, make a savings on it. So the money is funded. Yeah, that's right.
I know I was waiting for someone to say that.
The question has been asked in the community, how is that way going to get into the shed houses?
We're after this. Procurement. Despite everything, councillors, that's here, and then there's been some recommended amendments to the policy, there's some significant areas that I think also need a little bit more work. And now that we finally have a quorum, so we're confident that we'll be able to undertake reviews and updates, I'd like to use this to receive this report or this policy with the amendments to give direction around what we'd like to see further included, our intent with the procurement policy, and then the next meeting came to come back with all of those, to reflect all of those amendments. So I'm going to ask officers to lead through their own recommendation here. There needs to be some robust discussion around a number of these things, which I'm happy to do now or at a date when we see the policy in its entirety. But I think we need to give the officers some clarity so this is the first time in years, Brett, that we've actually had a quorum. We haven't actually substantially root and branch reviewed this policy for a number of years now, due to quorum issues. The last council couldn't do it. Well, what's the date of amendment adoption again?
16.
December 18.
December 18. So that just the areas that I'd like to give some consideration to, and we're going to require probably a little bit of work on this front, and it may involve Rick or an interrogation of the data at least, as to what cost to council the 6% weighting, and indeed even the 8% weighting on those contracts over 500 and over $1 million are. I say that in light that we've talked about a plan, and clearly we're going to sort of go away from that, but this policy needs to be agile to reflect our immediate forward scope of works. And in that, Rick, I'm assuming over the next 2 years is going to be a continuation of some substantial tenders, potentially around flood damage, but also in the TMR space as well. As things ramp up, we're going to have to, you know, as the deadline for completion gets closer on some of that flood damage, and we're still busy on recoverable works, we're going to. So I just want to make sure, now admittedly all of those works are funded, but we still need to give value for money, and we also need to ensure that we don't perhaps allow an acceptable behaviour to come in with an increase in weight price that's not justifiable. So that's a lot of money, 6% of effectively $3 million. That's a substantial amount of money. Now, council, the four of us might feel that that's a significant, that's a justifiable amount of money to do business for a tender of that size in this location. However, I would like to know that if we were to have halved that weighting, or how often has that weighting on the last 4 or 5 tenders over $1 million, last 2 years of tenders over $1 million, how often has that weighting actually been applied? It's always applied in the assessment, but how often has it been the difference between getting a job and not getting a job? Because that's actual cash out of our pocket. We don't pay the weighted price, we pay the tendered price, but it's assessed as a weighted price. So I think from $500,000 up to be giving away 8 or 6% on either of them thresholds could be not really in the best interests, you know, best value for money of ratepayers. I know we've got it, and I don't know that it's necessarily actually helping develop competitive local industry either, like when we're giving somebody several $100,000 head start. But I don't want to make an informed, I don't have the information in front of me to make an informed decision today, but I'm wondering whether other councillors feel the same. We don't want to send the officers away to do all this work if the other three of you are saying, nah, 6% is fine, I'm all cool with that, or 8%, let's not touch it. So that's one, and the other element is on the very bottom end, given that the vast majority of our transactions occur in the bottom threshold, in the less than 50,000. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, Matt or Brett, but that would be right, wouldn't it? As a volume of transactions, they'd all be under, the vast majority of them would be under 50,000. Yeah. So if we truly want to, I wonder whether we need to create a smaller category there with either the 12% weighting or a slightly higher weighting, and then.
Excuse me, Brett.
Yeah.
Can you spell out in plain English to me the weighting?
So what it means is if a local category 1 business, so that's someone who lives and operates here, submits a price, and someone who doesn't qualify as a local submits a price, the actual price of the local is lowered by that weighting percent to compare to the non-local price. So, to use figures, if a local tendered $11,000 $100,000 to do a job and a non-local, no, sorry, $100,000 to do a job. Is that the 10% category? Yep, tendered $100,000 and a non-local tendered $95,000. The price for the local would actually be $90,000. The assessed price would be $90,000 with the removal of the 10%. So there, on a price basis, the local gets the job because they're cheaper in inverted commas, but their actual cost to us is $100,000. We pay their tendered price, but we assess them on their weighted price, their lowered artificial price. And it depends the value of their tender, what percentage weighting we apply.
To price, yeah.
To price, only to price.
Sorry,
Only to price. That weighting only applies to price. But there is another substantial weighting, which is what's defined as a local business, which is on the bottom of page 10 there as well. So we're very prescriptive with that category 1 business, and probably rightfully so. That definition has moved a little bit over the years. We've had Cat 1s, Cat 2s. This is probably the most simplistic that the categorisation has been, as either a local business or you're either categorised completely as a local or not at all. We used to have this whole foot on either side of the fence, and it was complicated. So this year now that's defined. So there is sort of two weightings. For wet plant hire, for example, only locals that fit the definition of a category 1 are assessed unless there's none available, Rick, is that correct? So category 1 for wet plant hire, you're only a category 1 business that's assessed unless there's none available, and then you go further on vendor panel, don't you?
Yes. So that probably makes it more difficult to calculate what the cost is, because we're not seeing the prices of businesses that are not local. So we don't know what savings potentially could be there.
We would for the big ones.
So are they given $500,000 to $3 million? That's
Well,
what
that's
it's
what
asked
the
us to
category is.
investigate.
So just on that big stuff, councillors, are you interested in seeing whether that percentage for those really big high-end contracts, 500 and over and $1 million and over, whether that weighting is still relevant and what it's costing us, or are you comfortable to leave it as it is? Councillor West.
Mr. Mayor, my opinion, when you put a job out for tender, you're looking for the cheapest and the best tender to do that job, regardless whether it's a local or whether it's not. I don't see why a local person that's here, that's got his own trucks or graders or whatever, he's right here. I can't see how he can be able to tender a 12% cut on the person that's tendered for the job further away, and that he's got to bring his gear here. I'm not really in favour of the way.
So I'm not going to say I disagree or agree with you, just to put the cases to why it's there around supporting local industry, is it's to ensure that you do have locals, so and therefore recognising that the cost of operating on the scale that some of these people do in our area, we're weighting them on the acceptance that they're safe. For example, with their labour, they're competing with the resource sector to keep operators, or they could be over there, Middlemount, driving a coal truck. So that's been the argument previously. You're right, you're very right, that the need to not mobilise in itself should be a competitive advantage without then getting an additional 10%. But it's not about the individual job mobilisation, those weightings previously. The reason for that has been to ensure the continuity of local industry, and it's not only for road construction contracts or building contracts, it's also for the procurement of plant. So if somebody wants to locally, or oil, or everything we buy is covered by this policy. So if there's a local business, the policy, the view is that the ratepayers previously, with the way this policy's been set, is that the ratepayers are prepared to accept a hit on price to a threshold in the interest of supporting and ensuring small businesses get some co-investment from council. That's the basis for the weighting. it is a challenging concept. Councils and governments everywhere struggle with it, but then you've got councils like the Gold Coast during the Commonwealth Games construction, they jacked that percentage up to something like 30%, weighted towards local tradies. And the Queensland government openly do it on every single tender they put out. If you're a Queensland construction company, the weighting is, like, I'm not going to nominate a percentage, but I know it is substantially. It's a lot larger than what we've got. But we're talking about entities with a lot more money than we've got too. So we've got to ensure the value for money element of our competitive contract doesn't get eaten up by the need to support local industry. Councillor Gleeson.
I support, yeah, I probably said that wrong, I probably did say that wrong. I definitely support the local. I support buying local, but I don't support the way that it's worked out. I'm sorry, the way that it's worked out that we're not actually paying, that we're paying more for what we're actually getting. That's what you're saying.
Well, potentially, depending on the tenders, potentially we could be paying more to buy it locally or to get it done locally than we were if we were to use someone who doesn't qualify as a local business. Yes, that is correct. I don't know how many times it's happened, but the policy, the way the policy is set is that yes, it is possible to happen.
We've had, we know we had one contractor on Aramac Road, which is non-local, so they actually won the tender despite the local contractors. So that, you know, there was no loss there. The other big tenders that we've had on that job was two locals competing against each other. Now I'm just struggling to recall, so we can investigate whether there was any others that it has actually applied to.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it'd be very rare, I think. Just without going back and looking through it, I can't recall it happening very often.
Would it help you? Does it help in our? No, it's a ridiculous question. Sorry. If it's not happening, is it more on the basis that we've developed a competitive local industry by only effectively quoting locals, more so than the price mechanism? That locals are fully engaged and employed at every opportunity because they're the only ones that get a go.
I think it's a bit of both, Mr. Mayor. We are getting tenders from outside on the larger ones, but they're generally not as competitive. We've had the one with the flood package north of Jericho that was very competitive. But generally the external guys aren't competitive because they're busy in other places. As Councillor Gleeson said before, it costs them a lot to establish out here. Then on the flip side of that, we can't do stuff without our local contractors.
This policy may really came into play in that middle years, 2015, 16, where we had no flood damage, no work, and contractors are ringing every week, crying out for work. So councillors
You said if you weren't local, if you weren't a local contractor, we weren't interested in talking to you. Was effectively the attitude we set, because we had more work than we had. We had more local contractors than we had work for. At least this provided them some protection against.
Yeah. So why, it's got local written everywhere, so why are we sending the tenders out to everybody?
On the basis of availability, they're not. If the locals,
If they're not available, like all the local plumbing shops and that are not available, if they can't, if we send them the tender or purchase of whatever, and they can't supply, can't we do a quick calculation, quick turnaround? If they can't supply, then we put it out.
so that procurement only to local is only for wet plant hire. It's not for procurement of goods and services. We've always gone to marketplace on that. It was just purely for if we were getting basically graders, water trucks and rollers. They were the only ones that were locked out, where the non-locals were locked out. When you go to a road construction package, which is under full supervision, that's why the outside, it's full tender then, it's open tender process. which we're compelled to do when it hits 200,000 anyway. The Act overrides our policy, and it's written in here as well. But if they're looking for 100 polypipe joiners, that gets put out on marketplace threat to anyone who's registered as a provider of plumbing services. Is that right?
Well, not just, well, all the locals, because you only have to obtain 2 or 3 quotes depending on what category. So up to, yes, so
Up to 500, isn't it?
$500 we can go to a local business directly.
Yep.
Once you go over 500, it goes on the vendor panel.
And then when it's assessed, Councillor Gleeson, that's when the weighting then is then applied. So,
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Is it wrong to increase that 500 purchase orders up to $500 local business? If no local business can be supplied, then the purchase order must be signed and go further. Can that be lifted? I know we were talking about machinery and how we were local wide.
It was $1,000 was there at the last revision, we reduced it to 500.
and the reason for that predominantly is to make sure that we're not just running down and, because in some instances there's not 3 businesses locally to quote, so they use the exception further down that there is only 1 supplier reasonably available, which still gets overused. I've served on the audit committee too. So do you want to talk about the signing of orders? Sorry, the increase in orders, the recommendation there, sort of relevant to this. From the requisitions from 1,000 to 2,000, what impact that'll have?
It has no impact on financially, it's just time saving and finding someone to sign. We like to requisition orders because.
So what it doesn't mean that they can, it doesn't affect who gets the quote or who gets the tender. It has no difference to the quoting procedures.
So if the plumber wants to buy some pipe and it's $1,500, well, he can't requisition because it's over its limit of $1,000. So just more and more, the prices are over $1,000. So then you have to go and find someone else to sign the requisition, which would then go to someone else and sign the order. So you end up with 3 people.
But it doesn't change the quoting deal. They've still got a quote. They can't
Still
just...
the same.
Yeah,
Exactly the same. It's just who can sign the
Right.
requisition.
Very good.
It just frees up more people to be able to sign.
So then just to clarify for the officers on this local weighting, are we comfortable to get some information back of whether the weighting has been applied and whether it has, how much it's cost or what the potential for it to cost even moving forward could be in the size of the tenders that could be led in the next 12 to 24 months? We're happy to have a look at that at the least. Councillor Hanson.
Like if you, to take away that risk, my suggestion would be reduce the threshold, the $3 million threshold.
You could probably
You
go...
may not change the percentage, but you reduce the dollar thresholds, the percentages combined.
Or just abolish that million to 3 million. Just leave the last weighted category 500 to 999,000 perhaps. Yeah. And in terms of local support, so with the weighting we'll get more information on. The categorisation of a local business, are we happy with that definition on the bottom of page 10? Owning or leasing a business premises or depot within the area. Employ or subcontract people residing. If you're an owner, that's also sufficient as an employee. And the business or its owners are ratepayers or lease a property or are a permanent resident of our council area. Do we think that adequately defines a local?
I think so.
Yes.
If the business is an owner of local ratepayers or ratepayers or lease property, they must be a local region. I'm happy with that one.
Yep, I'm personally happy, so that's, you've got no
I
problem
don't know
with
of any issues recently involving that categorisation that the office has made.
Some other councils go for more complicated measures because there's a flip side of that argument is that there are other businesses that will benefit if we do bring out of town people in to work on contracts. So people do break it down into just not only who owns the business, but then also what percentage of local content is on the project. Because you could also have a locally owned business, but most of your content comes in from out of the region. And it probably doesn't apply so much to road projects, but it will definitely apply to, say, our sewage treatment plant work, where most of our cost is actually purchasing materials that are coming in from overseas. But it does complicate both the assessment process and also the reporting process as well, and then actually following up to make sure that they do actually deliver upon what they say they'll deliver upon.
I think the important thing for us is that category, our definition of it as opposed to the more complex one, delivers sustainable employment. Whereas if we looked at the element of bringing people in, yes, there are other businesses that benefit, but from a resident population point of view, it doesn't necessarily, or the spin-off is not necessarily as high with lower paid positions. So, yeah, I think we'll leave the definition by what we're hearing. The definition stays as is.
And on that point, Mr Mayor, Appendix B under the tenders, we do have a local employment clause.
Pleasing to note one of our rather large constructions that's underway at the moment was awarded out externally, but they've already engaged local tenderers, so that's really positive.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to see contracts in excess of 200,000 which are made public. I'd like to drop that down to like 50,000. Just for more transparency.
Where exactly is that?
Step 3, evaluation, page 3.
Contracts that are made, we legally we have to make publicly available 200,000 and above, but there's no reason why we can't publish anything over 50,000 or even 10,000.
Mr Mayor, coincidentally, there's a legal opinion this week published that we have to make it very clear when we obtain quotes that if we're going to make that information public, it has to be, we have to inform the suppliers because it's a breach of the Privacy Act. So that only came through, sure, this week. That if you're going to make contracts public, less than 200,000, because the Act says you have to over 200, but anything under 200,000, when we ask for a quote, we have to inform the supplier that the details may be made public.
Which still wouldn't be a problem.
Wouldn't be a problem, but we need
Do
to do what we say. Then, if we're going to make it public, we have to make sure that every time we ask for a quote, we inform them.
Or it becomes a standing thing on the bottom of the quote document, doesn't it?
I think that
If you submit to this, if you respond to this, details of your quotation can be made public, may be made public, will be made public.
I think that would be helpful because you can then check whether you're getting quoted the same. I mean, it would stop some businesses from quoting someone something if they know it's going to be published, and another business something else.
Do you think that might help stop the council tax, Councillor Rogers?
Maybe, yeah.
On the purchase, you were speaking of the
So I
The
think,
winner of the contract, I'm sorry, the winner of that,
no, everybody
everybody.
that tendered for it or quoted for it.
Through you, Mayor, can we maybe investigate that one, just to see what the sheer
How
volume
much?
of those
Yeah.
will be, to see whether or not we can
Yeah.
provide that information in a meaningful manner.
I can tell you what the volumes are, it depends what,
So over $50,000 for example.
so over 50,000, be at about 110 for a year. That's not substantial. By far the most, 85% of our purchases are under $1,000.
Right, so we'll look into that one, the transparency of tenders of quotes over 50,000. More from councillors before we go to the staff? Okay, well, let's go back to the start. And item 1, the value for plant sales support. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but can you turn the air conditioning off? I'm normally as hot as hell over here, but I'm actually cold, sorry. Sorry. Right. Who's leading this, Brett? Your report?
So, Mr Mayor, that's the after-sales service for any plant items that we purchase. Previously, we had 15,000 as the limit, so if we bought a mower for $10,000 a ride-on, then there was no requirement to provide after-sales support. We want to reduce that down.
What does that after-sales support look like that we're expecting, given that those mowers, for example, are going to be coming from somewhere not local if that happened? Are we going to get that support? Any different, really? Given they're not located
We
here.
do have good relationships with our regular suppliers who do provide support.
So is the change, does that trigger then, if we've got regular suppliers who are already doing it, does that lowering of that threshold, is it going to materially make any difference?
It will, because a local business could supply a piece of plant. It has happened that we purchased an item of plant off a local business. There's something wrong with the plant. We go back and they say, oh, you'll have to go to the manufacturer because it's not our problem. So we don't give that after-sales service that you would get from the supplier, the accredited supplier of that plant.
Councillors, your thoughts?
This is item number 1, value, reducing the value from 15 to 5.
It's not, there's very few items falling into that category.
So what's the basis of the 5? Does that mean that effectively those things that we are likely to have?
Well, that's where,
It's like
that's
a mower, for
that's our
example.
threshold for recognising a plant. So anything under that is expense. So that's the only reason I picked 5. It could be 0, it could be just for all items of plant. But then you exclude, once again, your local businesses that are supplying, so blowers and push mowers and all that sort of stuff.
Consumable stuff that you really don't need support, so
That's right.
you do it yourself. Councillors?
Mr Mayor, I have been advised by the office. I will go with their advice on the front.
Councillor Hanson? It's, yeah. Righto, 3 it is. I just don't want to see us do that, and then I just hope that so long as we are going to get that support, if we aren't buying it locally, that someone who lives somewhere else gets the benefit of supplying it, and then we struggle. So if the follow-up happens, well, that's good, but if we're giving them the money and we're not getting it anyway, then
There will require discipline from us too,
Yeah.
to
follow up on it.
then follow up and go back to the supplier.
Next one, an increase in the value of requisitions. So we've discussed that. That's a procedural thing.
Well, yeah, it's giving more people authority to sign.
I'm comfortable if the senior officers are comfortable with that.
It still needs someone else to sign off.
On the PO,
So
Right?
so the fraud risk is still low.
No problems with this? 3. Righto, this is one I want to hear about. Expanding plant hire, extending of contracts, minimum at the moment. The maximum tender you can win with a piece of plant, for example, is 3 months. I'm assuming this is looking to double it. It is looking to double it.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I can talk to this one. At the moment, when we call for plant hire on our projects might go for 6 months. We'll say call for a grader on site. Under our procurement policy at the moment, we can only take that grader on for 3 months. So that grader's there, he knows how the job works. It's not efficient then to change that grader over by calling another tender if someone else wins it after that. You've got to get that person in on that. He's got to work out how that project works, so it's inefficient to do it that way. We need to be able to extend this out to be able to cover a project. I would actually prefer it to say 6 months or project specific would be the wording I prefer.
I have no problem with that. When I asked for this to be introduced, I was a councillor at the time, but it was on the basis that you could contractors change 2 or 3 times after a job had started, and it is inevitably, I wouldn't say intentionally abused, but what had happened is the price would obviously be known to the successful tenderer. He would then resubmit on vendor panel his same price to continue the job, and the losers had come in $10 an hour under him and be instantly set. Like, it created an assessment issue then, because we used to have a point process. If you got 1 point if you were already on the job. So then the dearer guy was, so it was a very convoluted process that did get substantially abused. Can we adjourn and we'll send them over there, surely? We're not going to be finished this soon. Sorry, we're going to be a while. Do you want to wait in the other office to bring you? Yeah. No, we're not accepting. We're going to So, I've got no real issue with it. The only thing is that was raised at the time, because the wording you just used, Rick, is exactly what I proposed, and it was wound back somewhat because they wanted to make sure that there was still access to work, that one guy didn't win, and that then meant that the other water truck or the other grader or whoever it was had to sit there with his arms folded for 3 months. Or, I said forever, sorry, so it might be 4 or 5 months. I'm comfortable with the work we've got in front of us, that that's not going to be the case anyway, and if it becomes too prescriptive, we can always wind it back at a future review as our work drops off. So I think it makes perfect sense. You win the job, you stay in the job until it's finished, whether it's 4 months or 8 months.
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, another avenue is that, is to put it with the option 3-month rollovers. Just say you could get someone that was doing the job and just absolutely no good at it, and you employ it for 6 months. But if you've got 3 months with the option of offering 3-month rollovers, it gives you a little bit more leeway as well.
If we get the flexibility, if we're not happy with their work, to put them off anyway, whether they've won a job for 3 months or not.
Go through a process.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we assess their operators as well as part of the process. It's not just price, there's a number of things that are taken into account, previous experience, operator's experience.
We work a tender, 3-month tender with the option. So that way, you can put for 4 months, you can give them that option that other month to withdraw the tender. It just gives them the option to keep using them rather than say 6 months and the job went for 5 months. Every year and then we have to pay them in 6 months or whatever the case may be.
Well, we only pay them for the time they do on a job. There's an estimate of hours put to them when they do the quote, but they're only paid on the actual, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Gleeson, I'm sorry. I caught myself.
Extend clean hire contracts from 3 months to 6 months. Why not just the duration of the job?
Yeah, that's what the chief engineer is suggesting.
The end, coming that way.
What was happening was the job was someone would start and then 2 years later they're still working. So that was the reason I was brought in. We had to have a name. We never really assessed it at some point. Or else they become employees, but that's not employees. And we got that done. There's no end date, they never leave.
So it's potentially introduced an IR issues as well. So that considers you having ongoing employment with us.
Every time the contractor moves from one job to another, or is he constantly supplied with this job number and this state it?
That's what's happened.
That's one, yeah. So how do you get around that problem?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the issue will be, if you do it on a project basis, and the project has a duration obviously, the issue will be under the RMPC where it goes to 12 months. Whereas someone might be put on to do some shoulder aid and then they just keep them on for the whole 12 months. So it will require some discipline from staff to be able to keep it to a time frame.
I think our intent here is all pretty clear. We want someone to come on, you get a job, we've got a job grading the shoulders from Aramat and Buckle to now. When that job's over, that grade is stood down, whether it's 3 months or 7 or 8 or 4. So we just get the officers, so we're all on the one page with that. And you just find the wording that best minimises IR, HR implications, but achieves the stated goal of we want to see a grader stay on the job until it's finished, or as you say, have the option. Yeah. So we're happy to seek some advice back about that. Right? The other minor amendments to make wording clear, do we need to lead us through?
I know in the section 7 of the place tenders, under the Act, $15,000 limit. I've made that clear that we're using only one supplier of specialised and confidential. We can only use that up to $15,000 without it coming back to council for approval. So actually, put that on the answer there. Under the trade services panel, I think that has to do with just all the trade services, covers all the building electrical, plumbing, so that's just creating local panels that we can use for those. There's a fair bit of legislation provided, so I'll cut that right back. Just put the basic summary of the legislation, rather than repeating word for word what was in the act and regulation.
When you say council resolutions required for approval of amounts over 15,000, that means unbudgeted.
No, that's for, the only using that exception.
Right.
So if you say there's only one supplier available, officers can use that up to 15,000, but if it goes over that, then council has to approve.
Okay.
Has to approve that exception.
We haven't been doing that.
Well,
We just haven't had to use the exceptions, obviously.
but we have, council has approved using those exceptions.
So local body that you too?
It's
But
only the,
there's only a couple of them,
only
specialised
the three
nature
items.
and confidential nature.
You don't need it for genuine emergency, do you?
No.
Right. No more? All right. So to summarise, we're getting some feedback to look at whether we need to adjust the weighting and or introduce a lower category than 50,000. Probably not necessary, but we'll check on the basis that that's where the significant volume of our transactions occur. We're looking at the transparency arrangements around quote evaluations and the rest is procedural. Oh, sorry, and the extension of plant hire contract. We're just seeking a little bit of feedback about how the wording for that will fit our intent. And the plant sales support. Right, okay. Any more? Because I think these same three councillors have got a PCI, they do. Thanks, Jess. They're looking at us like they can come back inside, but it's not going to happen.
So you've got to move and second it.
Yeah, look, we're going to delete
Change the resolution.
that we review the procurement. The council reviews the procurement policy full stop and then delete the last 5 words. So we haven't amended anything yet. Councillor Gleeson moves. Councillor Hanson seconds. Debate. Those in favour? 4-0. Should we ask him? Damien, do you want to check with Councillor Flung whether she'd like a jacket? Considering we're still... Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Arthur. Yeah, guys, councillors, we finished that one, but there's no point in coming back in. So councillors, we're not in closed session, be they nod please. We have in front of us now 535. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, to assist with this, I've handed out 2 maps.
You did.
One shows flood levels pre-development and one shows flood levels mitigated. read these, the planners have identified the parcels of land that are affected by flooding. And the number that is written in each parcel is the flood height above floorboards of the buildings on that site. But where it's got a minus, it means that's below. So if it says minus 0.9 metres, it's 900 mils below the floorboards. So you have a pre-development flood map, which is the flood levels before the rec park was built. And you can see the houses that are, or the land that's affected by flooding. And this is in a 1 in 100 year event, which we haven't had, so we don't know about. So it's substantially greater than 1990, which is 1 in 50. And then you have the map for post-development, but mitigated by if council goes with the option of reducing the bank of the park. And you can you can check the comparison of the flood heights. So, for example, the large green parcel in Myrtle Street, before the rec park, it's 900 millimetres below the floorboards. Post-development, it's 766 millimetres below the floorboards. The house in Plain Street was 205 millimetres below the floorboards, pre-development. Post-development, it's 70 millimetres below the floorboards.
Just those next three directly under that, Brett, the figures don't seem to make sense to me. They seem higher post-development, but all the others are lower post-development.
This street you Mr Mayor, there's below and above the floorboards. So you'll notice it's negative to less negative, and the positive is to more positive.
So the two orange ones, it was already over their floorboards.
So it's going from 75 mil over their floorboards to 222 mil over the floorboards on that orange residence.
The house in Plain Street is actually lower. That's the reference I'm making, is the water level's lower for the house across the road.
No, it's not.
Post-development,
No,
pre-development.
water's higher, it's just
Hang on,
less.
sorry, yeah,
So it goes
205 to minus.
It goes from this far below the floorboards to this far below the floorboards.
Yeah, right, I'm getting what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Two negatives. That's the problem, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all relative levels of floorboard.
It's a reverse way of thinking. We normally think of the
Yeah,
height above ground levels, whereas, and it's a variable height because every house's floorboards are at a different level, so you're not working off a known quantity. It's the reverse logic method that I'd use. But every measurement you're looking at there is of each individual property's floorboards, which is the correct way to assess it. It's just different. Normally we think about height above ground level, not height above floorboards.
So that, I suppose, sets the context for the report. So the flood council, based on the flood engineer's assessment of the flood levels, based on legal advice. They've had the flood engineer's assessment peer reviewed by another engineer, so another flood engineer, so we've had the figures double checked numerous times. So the flood, so as a result of that, they've made basically two recommendations to council. One is to build a levy, in which case you flood-proof all the properties. But there's an expense to that. Or you lower the bank of the rec park by 400 millimetres. And so these plans are produced on lowering the embankment of the lake by 400 millimetres.
Brett, I'm a bit with Councillor Hanson. Over on the rec park side, that 1.1 host pre is 1.192 metres, and then the other is 1.796 metres. What's is that? That's not the height of the bank.
That's the rifle club.
Oh, the red is, yeah, right, that's right. So there's 1.4 metres there before. And
there's now 1.79.
it's just here after, because I host taking 400 off the bank.
So the idea is, Rick's probably the best one to explain how the water flows, but by reducing the height. Yeah. So we've got a little diagram here that we used the other day. Very simplistic. So that's the clubhouse down the end on the bank, and we have a spillway which is 900 mil below the bank. And that's on the western side. What the flood engineers are saying is we need to take off 400 mil from that spillway right around the whole eastern bank of the lake, and then as the water comes through, it will, if it gets to 100 flood, it will go over that bank and just spread out like a floodplain. Instead of backing up and flooding houses.
Just through Mr. Mayor, does that soil just need to be knocked off the side, or does it have to be removed from the site?
Through the Mr. Mayor has to be removed. Yeah. So we've got the intersection going into the rec park we've got to build, so we need some material there, fill material. And we need some fill material out of the sewage treatment plant as well for the upgrades there. And plus we need some material for capping out of the old refuse dump facility.
Okay, so okay, anything further to add, Brett, to walk us through?
We had a meeting with stakeholders on last Thursday night, and we took them through the plans council today for a preliminary decision about which direction council wanted to go. And then from there, we then have to submit a formal change to the development application, which would go to our planners, it would go through the planning process, and once that was approved, we would then come back to council for formal approval, and then we would have to do the work that's required. So in terms of council's, so today council has to make a decision about whether it accepts the engineer's report, flood engineers, that we're recommending that we go with the lowering of the bank as the preferred option. The cost does say 100,000 in this report, but that was the initial estimate, but because there's actually more of the bank that needs to be removed than what we initially thought, it'll actually be $150,000 as opposed to building a levy which is $715,000. And that the levy doesn't include the Aramac Road, so we would have to plug that every time there's a rain event.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
In that 150,000, Brett, would that be the legal and planning costs and all that in that, or possibly more? There'll be possibly more of that trick every time you go to the planning road, costs money, doesn't it?
No, that would just be that's just the actual removal of the soil.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, would we make, possibly we'd make some savings though with that, if we don't have to get the fill material from elsewhere, is that we should have a saving? We don't have to buy that material for the
Dump.
dump and the,
Yes, please. Somebody can.
Can I ask when the stakeholders were present for the meeting?
Yeah.
There were 3 property owners present.
Mr. Mayor, I thought there was 7 or 8 invitations sent out for the meeting?
Yeah.
And only 3 persons. Is it also appropriate for me to ask at this point in time approximately how much it's cost the council for all the legal costs and everything at this point in time, or should not ask that question at the moment?
Well, still an ongoing cost, still not finished yet.
It costs ratepayers a lot of money.
It's unavoidable though, because it's a planning issue that we've got to deal with. We can't not deal with it on the basis it's 2 year.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, are we allowed to ask what sort of response we got from those stakeholders? How they're feeling about the options we've given them?
So we presented, originally we wrote to them and told them about 5 different options we're looking at. So we spent some time just closing out 3 of the options and then presented them and sought their feedback on the 2 feasible options that would best address the problems at hand. And of those 2 options, their preference on the night was definitely for the reduction in the embankment as opposed to the building a flood levy. They didn't see that as being favourable given the increased costs as well as the ongoing O&M costs and the fact that every time you had a 10% AEP flood or rainfall event or greater, you'd have to move the material across the road.
They're going to be happy based on
So
that.
they realised that.
If we do that, that's the end of our problems with stakeholders.
Yeah, unfortunately that's not.
I'm asking.
So what was that?
If we do this flood mitigation, is that going to be the end of the problems we have with the stakeholders? Or is it going to be an ongoing problem even if we do?
Answer that from a legal point of view first before we get to the political.
In terms of addressing the planning issues that we have at hand and what best addresses our legal liabilities, yes, it will address the stakeholder concerns that have been raised to us to date. But in
Yeah, the political side of that is for us to determine. That's why I just asked, and don't know, I wasn't leading Anna into an area. I just wanted to have a technical answer to that question, because the technical answer to that and the actual ongoing answer could be two different things. But if we're not exposed, if we've minimised their exposure legally and complied with planning legal requirements, then that's the answer to that. It's what further conversation that affected stakeholders continue to have with or against us is indeterminable at this point, I would imagine, given the correspondence that we've received, I've received today, and you have as well. I would suggest that it's probably not. To all concerned, I want it to be known that none of the stakeholders attending the recent meeting with council officers re-mitigation options were in agreement with any options put forward by council officers.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to vote.
Councillor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I was considering the ongoing and whole of life costs of the levy. That's what the way I'm considering it is probably just cost. The levy probably would, keep the water totally out of all of those properties, but just the cost, it's just.
And the cost there, we've got a cost for the levy bank, but if you want my non-engineering TMR assessment, the bigger cost will be the alterations to Aramac Barcaldine Road. That actual levy construction cost will be substantially smaller. Rick, would I be in the ballpark of close to accurate?
Mr. Mayor, if we were going to put some sort of a flood barrier in across the road, then you can probably at least double the price there of 700 or 1,000. If you actually had to raise the road up and over, you probably have to upgrade the Aramac Creek, the Lagoon Creek crossing as well, because of the proximity of it. So yeah, you'd run into substantial millions.
And also the stakeholders that have always had a strong opinion against
The levy, correct. Is there anything in this report, I've read it very clearly, but is there anything that we should have drawn to our attention? The officer's recommendation is very clear. Is there any element of the report that has a legalistic, nothing? It all seems very straightforward, but the last time we looked at one of these, we overlooked the fact that the planners actually recommended we not proceed until this was done. Is there anything that's deep in here that we can't see?
Mr. Mayor, this is a direction, I suppose, to take the next step, which is to formally amend the development application, which then would go back to the planners. So that would be prepared by a planner, go back to the planners for assessment, which would then come back to council for approval. So there's still another couple of steps of approval that this has to go through, and assessment. So this is giving officers a direction of which option would council like to take in relation to this matter. The only other thing is the tolerable and acceptable risk. So they come up with the state planning policy. We need to, council needs to assess those, or the planners have assessed it and recommended that at the bottom of page 181, while the development does not avoid the natural hazard it is considered that with the implementation of either mitigation option 3 or 4,
Which
risks
is-
to people,
which is E or F directly above it. Sorry, Greg.
yes, can be maintained at acceptable and tolerable levels. So that is taking, so tolerable is like taking, what my definition's right, is about the community and society, so, you know, how big of an impact is it on the community as a whole, and those individual households, and then there's council willing to accept that risk. So they're saying that, so they've done an assessment on every property, they've rated them, and done a risk assessment, and the overall risk that they're saying is tolerable.
So the key to me is in the summary of the conclusion. Just above that as well, where it deals with option B, the lowering, where it says, therefore, under this mitigation strategy, the one dwelling and one sporting clubhouse identified as being flooded above the floorboards as a result of unmitigated development would likely once again experience flooding below the floorboards should this option be implemented. And then further in the conclusion, to look at the thoroughness of which this has been undertaken, that the ski park development and both flood mitigation strategies were considered with respect to the assessment benchmarks, natural hazards, risk and resilience of the SPPP, State Planning Policy 2017, and the Barcaldine Shire Council Planning Scheme 2006. They advised that while the development does not avoid the natural hazard being flood, it is considered that with the implementation of either mitigation option, risks to people and property can be maintained at, as Brett said, acceptable and tolerable levels, and that unmitigated is unlikely to hinder disaster response capacity or capabilities. I think the conclusion is very direct, clear advice. My question was just basically, is there anything that's not transparent that we would have detected? And if that's the case, well, I'm happy to proceed on the basis of lowering the bank, would be my thoughts, rather than a levy bank. Like removing the 400 mil rather than installing a levy. Councillor Hanson?
Yeah, I'm on board for that.
Councillor Gleeson? Councillor Rogers?
Yes, considering that it's only going to happen in one in 100-year flood.
We just quickly go through this resolution, then please ensure that we understand every sub-bulletin and dot point here. So we've got A, we're receiving this report, and we note those recommendations. We're clear with what we're accepting there.
Yeah, we're receiving the report.
Yep. And we note those recommendations within the strategy.
There's a dollar figure somewhere, I don't know whether it comes in, a dollar figure.
There's a dollar figure underneath both strategies, that's correct, although it's only a partial figure for the levy. So the second point here is we adopt the flood mitigation strategy contained within the ACS study dealing with. Okay, so we adopt the flood mitigation strategies contained within the ACS study that deals with 1, specific design elements for the protection of the lake embankment during flood events. Do we know what that means? Is that, in plain English, lowering the bank? Is that what that means, Rick? Or is that dealing with flood batters? What does that actually mean?
I think both.
Protection of the lake embankment.
notice.
Well, that's what I'm assuming it means.
So whether that's rock, solid.
So that is what it means. So that's the design elements that's required to look after the lake infrastructure. Design for infrastructure associated with the rec park. So that's the additional buildings, roads, car parks. Would that be and entrance ways, etc. That's what that is. 3, operational requirements of the rec park with respect to flood events.
So that's the operational plan that if there was a major flood, what actions would we take?
Okay.
Besides, closing it. So these will all, if council adopts this resolution, then we have to then address those in the amendment to the
4,
development application.
review of the town flood warning and evacuation procedures, which we would undertake annually anyway, but we're to do that with special consideration to the impacts of the rec park, which is to look at, and it has been considered in here. There was specific reference to that. 5, incorporation of additional assessment criteria for future development within the identified flood zone. Will that mean updating our already submitted planning scheme with respect to development in the flood zone to ensure it complies with what the report's recommended?
I'm not sure what that. I assume that means that any future development we have to assess against these new flood levels, not old flood modelling.
So can we just ensure that the team in rural planning that are undertaking does that, so that the action out of that was that they understand that. 6 says I there, can we just, Roman numeral might need to be VI. Considers the alternative flood mitigation strategies put forward by ACS engineers and adopts the preferred option of lowering I'm sorry, this has just been explained to me, but
So there's the 2 options.
Yep.
So engineers are given 2 options, a levy or lowering the embankment. And both, they're saying both are acceptable and tolerable solutions.
yep, that's fine.
So it's up to council. So it's saying that councils have considered both alternatives and adopts.
And now we're adopting the other one. Yep, that's fine. That's what I was trying to just get straight. So what we'd be accepting here with point 6 is we would be saying as a council, that's our option to the discarding of the others effectively. And then the last point is we're authorising the CEO to prepare necessary formal minor change application with the engineering plans where necessary to modify condition 7 of the already approved approval to reflect the outcome of B and C above. We're all clear on what we're voting for in this resolution? Happy to take time if you're not.
I'm happy, but I'm sorry, the dollar figure again, where did that come into it?
It doesn't.
It doesn't, does it?
No, because it's not a fixed price, it's an indicative price.
This is where we've allowed the 150,000 in the budget. Yeah. To cover that. We actually had 350,000 in this year's budget, which we didn't spend. We'll have to spend it in the next year.
Okay. Councillor Hanson, are you comfortable to proceed to debate and vote? Councillor Gleeson?
Yes.
That's Councillor Rogers. Officers, anything further to add before we proceed formally? Do I have a mover for this resolution? Councillor Rogers, seconded Councillor Gleeson. Debate? Being none, I put the resolution as presented to the vote. Those in favour? Carried 4-0. Thank you very much. Right. We may repopulate the room. Anyone like need a break? It's been. You want to get a coffee? Sorry, Sam, mate. We're just making you wait just a little bit longer.
Hey, Brett. You wanted. A long time since we've been in here.
Cold. Oh.
We don't even have a day on load and colour the book. So we made use of the time.
Multi-skilling, Councillor Plum.
Right.
Multi-skilling.
Yeah, councillor. Yeah.
Service to the community. Service to the community.
One storm. Oh. Okay, can I have someone move that we receive the financial report, please? Councillor Plum. Councillor Peoples. Questions? Budget meeting day, I suppose there's not going to be too many questions. 551.
Is this the vote?
Oh, my apologies. All in favour? Carried 7-0. 551. Can I have somebody move Rick's report to be received, please? Councillor Peoples, seconded Councillor Hanson. Those in favour? Carried. Rick, anything you'd like to lead us to here?
Not particularly, Mr Mayor. We had some reasonable weather, so
This afternoon might have ruined that, Rick.
it missed the projects, Mr Mayor.
Did it really?
Oh,
That's the way I look at it. Mr Mayor, so that we should be getting seals on the Bark Yarramak Road first project within a week, which is good. That's on that safety project. The other one will follow that in the next couple of weeks. We're also on target on the Clement Alpha Road on the TMR project there to get a seal on it within the next few weeks as well.
Right. Questions? Summit. Truck pad amenities alphas going to go all well.
Mr Mayor, the contractors started building, so they're building it off-site and then transporting it, so they're building the frames. I've got to inspect some frames this week, so I'll probably be doing that tomorrow. Yeah, so all going well.
Okay. No more questions?
Mr Mayor, can I just ask something? Is this today's Rick's last day, or is he going to be here for the meetings?
No, I have a fourth week.
Hmm?
A fourth week.
Is this your last meeting, Rick?
I would assume so.
Oh, on behalf of the councillors, Mr Mayor, we would like to sincerely thank Rick for all he's done for us.
Good on you, Beck. Nothing like stealing like that.
Oh, well,
Servants call.
Decorum,
Two
Mr
or-
Mayor, it's councillor Plum.
well, I didn't
Not
think
after
you
she
were going
stole
to do
my thunder. She's back now all day and for the rest of today and half of tomorrow.
I didn't think you were going to do anything, so I just thought. Sorry, but you can flip.
Text across the chamber or something, maybe. Talk to me at lunch, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor.
Well done, Councillor. I like the initiative, I really do. I was a bit nervous about doing or saying anything because who knows what could happen in other states of Australia at any moment in time. Rick might have to reappear, make a cameo appearance with COVID.
But we just want him to know that we enjoyed him thoroughly for what he did for us.
Very hard to say any more than what you've just said there, Councillor Plum. Thank you. I'm sure it won't be the last we see of you, Rick. You may not necessarily have to present that report again, but I'm sure we'll see plenty more of you in and around the place. No more questions for Rick then? You're going to let him off lightly with his last report? All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Arthur. You may depart. Tender award, please, Rick.
So, Mr Mayor, this one's for Belltopper Creek, which has been very topical on the Aramac Torrens Creek Road. So it's TMR, flood damage works. Originally, it was estimated this was going to be under 200,000 by TMR and council. So we called for tenders on vendor panel. Subsequently, it came back over 200,000, so between 200,000 and 300,000. We had two tenderers. TMR after that issued us with a variation for some more pavement works that they got approved through flood damage in the same area. So what we did is we went back to those two tenderers, put that to them. One tenderer decided not to re-tender, and this is the other tender that stayed in. So total overall was $480,000. So the reason this has come here, obviously, because it's over $200,000, and we also didn't go through the normal advertising process for the tender because originally it was going to be under 200 grand.
Councillor Peebles.
So you just, you're happy with that, Rick? And are you happy that we didn't do the normal advertising and go ahead with that?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we got the normal tenderers that we get for this work. The contractor has done a lot of work for us in this space, so we're happy with the work we'll get. So.
You know, I guess it's probably a bit emergent because that road's been closed to one lane for some time now, and, you know, it's overdue to get done, so I'll move it along those lines.
Through you, Mr Mayor, just to further that, TMR have been pushing us for a price on this as well, so and that curtailed the going out to tender in the first place if it was over, or going back to tender, I should say. Seeing we knew it was over 200,000 once we got those tenders.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peebles. Seconder, Councillor Hanson. Any further discussion?
I'm pleased that it's happening. You only wanted to shower like because at certain state or just down the road this morning on that road, and that road will be totally closed.
Mr Mayor, it did go over again in December, January, so we're keeping a close eye on it to see whether it deteriorated any further. So we were very wary of that, making sure when it came back out of water that we're assessing it as well. So yeah, it's held up pretty well considering actually.
One more question, Mr. Mayor. Yes. Approximately when would the job be started?
We'd have to get it into the program with the tenderer, but we'll be pushing to get it done as soon as possible. TMR want it done, obviously, so does the community, so we're pushing to get it done as soon as possible.
Okay. the vote. All in favour? Carried 6-0. Councillor Arthur may rejoin us. Okay, Aramac Street School Bus. Recommendation here from the District Manager is that we authorise the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate the sale of the council bus to the Aramac State School to assist with the proposed school bus run. There are currently 2 buses that have limited use that could be suitable. Plan item 6134, probably the top of the list there, I would suggest. The Jericho bus. Right.
As to me, the only concern is the age, because one of the requirements is can't be older than 10 years, so both of those buses are
10 years.
10 years. So we need to just confirm whether that's acceptable or not.
Councillor Gleeson.
Mr Mayor, it says in black and white, isn't it? This is just to assist with their application proposal, is that correct?
No, we've already got the proposal. No, it's to assist with the proposed school bus run. I think they just need the bus. It's fair, done, funded. Is that correct, Paul?
No, they're fine.
They need to approve that they have a bus available, so they can apply for it.
Well, where is this bus from?
I'm not sure exactly how far up the Torrens Creek Road it goes, probably up past the turn off and maybe another 20 k's, and then it'll come back and go up along the Munnabara Road for 20 or so k's as well. Ben is coming down to meet the bus. As far as I know, it's going to try and do both the roads.
How many extra kids?
6, I think.
6 new, so it's not 6 students that are currently being driven to and from, it's 6 that are doing correspondence.
Just three, Mr Mayor, and Paul, how many kids all up is it on that road?
Just the 6 of them.
Just 6. Past experience of what hard to get across the road. 6 is the lower limit for school bus run. Once you've got 6 kids, they start looking at placing it here, not actually opening it up.
We've had that problem here before.
Any more coming on?
I believe she says 14 on her web.
Anyway, that's up to them to sort that out.
And this doesn't affect anything with regards to any of the bypassing or any of that sort of stuff, it's just mostly primary school and the other kids coming out on that other bus, that doesn't change any of that, does it? Well, Mr Mayor, on that one, if there's any way we could help, I'll be willing to. I don't know if that is.
Buses might be too old.
They both been more one's only got 30 years pay on.
It's the one that, because it's got the wheelchair there. So there's 2 seats missing out of it.
So it still needs 9 seats.
And if we need that wheelchair for NDIS.
Or aged person.
So the Jericho one's the ideal one, which was originally an Aramac bus anyway.
So if we got this bus for the school and they would have to look at the 10-year and the kilometre issue, but then would the school be able to afford to trade this and buy themselves a bus, do you think?
I think in the letter they say that they're going to seek funding through community groups. The principal is aware that the buses are 2011 buses.
Okay.
She didn't see a problem with that.
Okay.
The intent is that we're not loaning it to them, though. It becomes their, like, they ownership rests with them after this transaction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to trade up, that'd be entirely they don't need our ongoing approval as to what they do with it after the.
So the other question I've probably got is it getting any use in the area?
I believe, Mr Mayor, yes, it is. It's being used at the moment for
As a bus though?
Um,
Like is it being used to move? No, it's just being used
just
to
transport. Yeah.
one or two people around.
Yep.
Mr Mayor,
Councillor, please.
negotiate the sale, so there's dollars involved.
That's what the resolution says, yes.
To further on from that, we can't, I'm like to look after everybody, but we've got 5 schools, 5 little towns. We'd be seen to look after one school, there's children, parents driving children up and down the Tambo Road or the Pamela Road or the Marlborough Cransby Road. Is there going to be any kickback or is there going to be more?
They could do the same thing. You know, that this group's approached us, those other groups haven't. And they're still going to buy it anyway.
So they wouldn't be buying it at cost price, at a reasonable price.
And that's what happened with that bus initially. It was asked for by the Jericho community that we give them a bus. So it's been done in the past.
We didn't even sell that in that case. We just transferred it through there and let them hire it. It did not do 1 kilometre.
No, mate, I'm just
But ask the right question.
No, I wouldn't know whether there'd be any kickback, but there's no other proposal on the table, and it's not like we're doing a favour for them. We are probably doing them a favour, but they're paying for it. So if we were gifting it, there'd be more concern, I think, along your lines. But it's not. The resolution's not to gift it, so I don't think there'd be too much negative.
And once again, at this point in time, it is to assist with the proposal. So it's, if we pass this, then it's up to the CEO to negotiate and assist with the proposal.
Well, the sale of the bus is what assists with the proposal.
Yeah,
they
assist
still,
with their proposal.
they got to do all the rest of it to get it off the ground.
Thank you.
Okay.
And through you, Mr Mayor, so if the bus fund doesn't get up, the school doesn't buy the bus?
The way I view it.
Yeah, it just needs to be an arrangement so that they can prove they have access to a registered roadworthy bus, and then if the school run doesn't come up.
They're not going to be stuck with the bus they can't use yet.
Yep.
Further thoughts, Councillor Peoples?
Well, Mr Mayor, I'd like to see the CEO do some negotiation and give them a hand and see where it lands with regards to them getting the bus run.
Are you happy with that?
Yep, and the only thing is what we just discussed there previously, that the bus run doesn't get up, they don't have to pay for it, it comes back to us, is that?
That'd be a negotiation about how the sale
Well,
happens.
yeah, I know that.
Do we have a move? Councillor Gleeson, second Councillor Peoples. Those in favour? 7-0. Any opposition to this? No, councillors, I meant, sorry. Councillor Peoples. Do you have any opposition to this resolution, or just move it and second it, or do we need to discuss it?
The only thing I'd say is that we don't make this a habit, that we've got to be good reason that we do ride off unpaid rent, and I'd say that there is one here, otherwise we wouldn't get them to stay, but people don't pay the rent.
This is a special case.
Yeah, I've heard it, so I'm okay with it.
Mr Mayor, if I'm looking at the other side of being a bad rental, you can go on a list as being a bad rental. So when we get people like this, do they go on that list so that people know not to
I'm just cognizant of the officer's report here about health concerns, so we are in open meetings, so the answers they give here will have to be very caged, very careful.
Yeah, no, that's all right. I just wondered, no, not in this case, but looking at previous rentals and they don't pay their.
Have we got a history of bad rentals?
Yes.
Substantial.
Not substantial, but 17.
Councillors, are we moving this? Councillor People, second it. Hanson, debate. Those in favour? Carry. Radif. Councillors happy with this? The report? Supported?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yeah, it was, the school is putting on a production and I think the majority of that funding will go to them developing their costumes and should be a good project.
Righto. Councillor Plum moves, Councillor People seconds. Those in favour? Carried. Opposed? 307.